The little black girl texted the biker as unknown riders formed a silent perimeter around the entire dockyard. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. Imagine a quiet evening on the docks, the salty air mixing with the distant hum of the waves. The sun had just set, and a soft orange hue lingered in the sky. But within the shadows of the massive industrial docks, a little girl, no more than 10 years old, was huddled against the cold metal beams of a shipping container. She had just sent a frantic text. Her hands trembled as she held her phone. "Please help me. I'm at the docks. They are coming for me." The message was short, but it carried a sense of panic that was impossible to ignore. The biker, Jack Forge, was in his garage, deep into the task of fixing his beloved Harley when the text came through. He had promised her father, his best friend, that he would protect her. It had been 5 years since that promise, made under the shadow of a war that cost them both so much. He quickly read the message, his heart skipping a beat. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and stormed out of the garage. His mind raced. It wasn't just a promise. It was a sacred vow. Jack pulled his phone from his pocket and texted his crew. "It's time. Meet at the usual spot." Within minutes, the responses came flooding in. His club, the Thunderwolves, were ready. Every member was on alert, prepared to ride, and support him no matter the cost. As Jack got into his truck and began driving to the rally point, the streets blurred past him. The night was cold, and the weight of what was to come settled in his chest. This wasn't just about keeping a promise. This was about protecting an innocent child from a danger far worse than anything he had encountered in the military. By the time he arrived at the meeting spot, the rest of the riders were already waiting, their bikes roaring to life as they revved their engines. Jack stood at the front of the pack, looking over his family. The riders were tough, but they weren't heartless. They understood loyalty, and they understood family. Every single person there had dropped whatever they were doing to answer the call. They were united by a bond forged in fire, and tonight, they would put that bond to the test. "Listen up," Jack's voice rang out over the hum of the engines. "We're heading to the docks. The little girl is in danger, and we're going to make sure she's safe. We don't know what we're up against, but we ride hard, and we ride smart. No violence unless we're forced to." The riders nodded, their faces grim. They all understood. Jack mounted his bike and revved the engine. The Thunderwolves followed in perfect formation, a powerful river of motorcycles cutting through the night. The sound of their engines was deafening, but to anyone watching, it would have felt like the earth itself was trembling. The city was silent, but the riders were on a mission. As they neared the docks, the tension grew. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He looked at it quickly. It was another text from the girl. "They're here. I don't know what to do." Jack's stomach clenched. The girl was terrified, and they were running out of time. The docks were deserted, the only sound coming from the faint waves crashing against the shore. Jack motioned for the group to spread out, forming a perimeter around the entire dockyard. The riders moved quickly, silently, positioning themselves in perfect formation. There was no room for error. They were here to protect, and they weren't leaving until she was safe. The roar of the motorcycles echoed in the cold night air as Jack Forge led the Thunderwolves into position. The docks were eerily quiet, the only sounds being the distant crash of waves against the shore and the faint hum of the city in the background. Jack's heart raced, but his face remained calm. His eyes scanned the area as the riders silently spread out, their bikes positioned like a barricade, ensuring no one could enter or leave without being seen. The girl was still somewhere inside, terrified, but safe for now. The moment they had all been waiting for had arrived. Jack looked over his shoulder at his club, who were now in full formation. His voice broke the silence. "We stick to the plan. No one moves until we know exactly where she is." His words were clear, authoritative. He knew the stakes. They weren't just here to protect her. They were here to make sure nothing, and no one, stood in their way. The sound of Jack's Harley rumbled as he slowly rolled forward, his eyes scanning the perimeter. He knew this part of town well. He had ridden these streets countless times in his youth, but tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't just a biker on the road. He was a protector, and these riders, his brothers, would do whatever it took to keep their promise. As the Thunder Wolves quietly moved into the shadows of the docks, a voice crackled over the radio. It was Diesel. "I got eyes on a man approaching from the south side," Diesel said in a low voice. Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened. He nodded slightly, signaling for his crew to keep their distance, maintaining their cover. The man in question was walking slowly, his hands in his pockets, his head down, seemingly unaware of the perimeter the Thunder Wolves had established. "Stay on him," Jack ordered. "Don't let him out of your sight." The riders positioned themselves to keep the man under constant surveillance, their eyes locked on him as they waited for further developments. The clock was ticking. It felt like an eternity, but in reality, it had only been minutes since they arrived. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting the tense silence. He pulled it out and saw the text from the girl, the one they were all here for. "I'm in the warehouse. They're trying to find me. Please hurry." Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped they'd be able to locate her before anyone noticed the Thunder Wolves had arrived, but it seemed that wasn't going to be the case. The tension was palpable. "We've got to move," Jack said, turning to face his crew. "No more waiting." With that, the Thunder Wolves revved their engines and surged forward. The plan had shifted. No longer was it a matter of waiting for the girl to be found. Now it was a matter of getting to her first and keeping her safe at all costs. Jack led the charge, weaving through the shadows of the dockyard, his mind focused entirely on the girl. He could see the glow of the warehouse in the distance, its lights flickering in the darkness. It was there, hidden in plain sight, where they would make their stand. As they approached the warehouse, Jack could see the silhouette of a man in the doorway, his figure barely visible against the lights spilling out from inside. The girl was in there. Jack knew it. He motioned for the others to spread out, keeping a safe distance between each rider. They would surround the warehouse, ensuring no one could escape and no one could enter. The man in the doorway turned suddenly, his eyes narrowing as he saw the bikers approaching. He was about to make a move when Jack's voice cut through the silence, cold and firm. "Stay where you are." The man froze. "We're here for the girl," Jack added. The man's expression shifted, but he didn't move. It was clear that he was waiting for something, and Jack didn't have the patience to figure out what. "Get her out here," Jack ordered. The tension in the air thickened as the warehouse doors creaked open. There, standing in the doorway, was the little girl. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, her small figure barely visible in the dim light. The moment she saw Jack, she ran to him, her tiny hands reaching out. "Uncle Jack, help me," she cried. Jack's heart broke, but he didn't show it. He pulled her into his arms, protecting her with every ounce of strength he had. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice soft but firm. "We're not going to let anything happen to you." The Thunder Wolves stood by, their eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The girl, now safely in Jack's arms, clung to him tightly, her tears soaking his leather jacket. Jack's mind raced. He could feel the danger closing in, but he also knew they had to get out of there, fast. The girl was safe for now, but that didn't mean the threat had passed. Jack looked at his crew, signaling for them to start moving. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice low, but resolute. As they made their way out of the dockyard, Jack kept the girl close. They had promised her father they would protect her, and they weren't going to break that promise now. The Thunder Wolves rode off into the night, a powerful force of protection and loyalty, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The Thunder Wolves rode in formation, their engines growling like a pack of wolves on the hunt. The cold night air cut through the leather of their jackets as they headed out of the docks. Jack Forge held the girl tightly, her small body nestled against him. The fear that had gripped her moments ago seemed to fade with each mile they put between them and the danger. She clung to him, her tears still wet on his jacket. But Jack knew they weren't safe yet. They had only made it out of the immediate threat. The girl's stepfather, a man with dangerous connections, wouldn't give up easily. Jack's mind raced as he thought about what they had just avoided. The docks were quiet now, but the silence felt like a ticking clock. It wouldn't take long before more trouble came. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He glanced at it quickly, another text from Diesel. "We've got a tail. Someone's following us. They know we're on the move." Jack's heart skipped a beat. The last thing he wanted was to lead a pursuit. He quickly tapped a response. "Keep eyes on them." Let's make sure we're not being followed. His crew was experienced, trained in being unseen when they needed to be, but the girl's safety was his priority now. Every decision he made had to be calculated, fast, and without error. He glanced at the girl again. Her eyes were wide, but she was calm, the silence in the air now wrapping around her like a blanket. She was still too young to understand the danger that lurked, but Jack could see it in her eyes. She had lived through enough. He couldn't help but think of the promise he had made to her father, Tyrone. The man had died saving his life, and now it was Jack's turn to save Tyrone's daughter. The Thunder Wolves continued their ride, moving through the streets of the city, the hum of their bikes the only sound in the night. Jack led the way, his eyes scanning the road ahead. His mind kept drifting to the girl's stepfather, Patrick Donovan, a cop with a history that could easily get him into trouble. Jack knew that Donovan had connections, and if he was involved, things could get ugly fast. Jack wasn't afraid of trouble. He had faced it his whole life. But this was different. This was personal. Donovan had made a lot of enemies, and some of them were dangerous. If they were coming for the girl, they would be relentless. The thought of her being caught again made Jack's blood run cold. He looked over his shoulder at the pack of riders behind him. Every single one of them was alert, watching, ready to act. They weren't just bikers, they were family. They understood the meaning of loyalty. That was why Jack knew they would fight until their last breath if it came to that. They didn't leave family behind. As they approached a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town, Jack motioned for the group to slow down. He could feel the tension building in his chest. "We're almost there," he said into the radio. "Stay sharp. Keep your distance." The riders followed his orders, their headlights dimming as they spread out, taking up positions in the streets around the house where Jack had planned to stop. They weren't taking any chances. Jack's eyes scanned the house in front of him. It was dark, quiet. The porch light flickered as he brought his bike to a stop in the driveway. He didn't trust the silence. His hand rested on the throttle, ready to move at a moment's notice. He helped the girl off his bike, his large frame towering over her as he shielded her from view. "Stay close," he whispered. She nodded, gripping his sleeve tightly. Jack led the girl up the driveway, his ears straining for any sound. He knew that Donovan's people could be anywhere. His thoughts were interrupted when a voice crackled over the radio. "Jack, we've got movement," Diesel said. "Two cars approaching from the east." "It's them." Jack's heart sank. They had been tracked. The chase was on. "Everyone stay in position," Jack commanded, his voice low but firm. "We won't run. We stand our ground." He wasn't about to back down now. Not when they were so close to getting the girl to safety. The sound of engines revving grew louder as the two cars neared. Jack's grip tightened on the girl's hand, but he kept his face calm. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The cars screeched to a halt in front of the house, their headlights blinding. The doors opened, and two men stepped out, their faces hidden in the shadows. Jack's mind raced as he sized them up. They weren't cops. These were goons, hired muscle. The girl's stepfather was behind this, but he wasn't the one out front. Jack's fingers twitched on the grip of his bike. The moment the goons moved toward the house, Jack stepped forward, his voice carrying through the night. "You're not getting her." The goons froze, and for a moment, the world stood still. Then one of them moved forward, drawing a gun. "This is none of your business," the man growled. "You can't just walk away from this." Jack's jaw tightened. "You're not taking her," he repeated, his voice hard as steel. The Thunder Wolves had surrounded the house now, and their bikes were revved up, ready for action. This was their turf, and they would not let anyone take the girl. The standoff lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then, without warning, the goons lunged toward Jack. The fight had begun. The two goons moved faster than Jack had anticipated, their eyes locked on him with malice. The moment the man with the gun lunged forward, Jack's body reacted instinctively. His hand shot out, grabbing the wrist of the man with the gun before he could aim. The man growled, struggling to break free, but Jack's grip was ironclad. The biker's other hand came up, delivering a sharp elbow to the man's gut, knocking the wind out of him. The man staggered back, but Jack didn't give him a moment to recover. With one swift movement, Jack slammed his fist into the man's face, sending him sprawling onto the ground. The second goon, still standing back, hesitated for a moment, but the look on Jack's face made him think twice. Jack took a step toward the man, his eyes burning with cold fury. "You're not taking her," he said again, this time with a finality that sent a chill down the goon's spine. The goon backed away, his hand hovering near his waistband as if considering pulling a weapon. But before he could, a voice called out from the shadows. You heard him. The voice was low, gravelly, and full of authority. Jack turned his head just as his club members emerged from the darkness, their bikes forming a solid wall around the house. The Thunderwolves were here, and they weren't going anywhere. The goon's eyes darted between Jack and the riders, now surrounded by a wall of leather and steel. He slowly took a step back, his hand still on the gun, but he knew it was useless. There were too many of them, and they weren't backing down. Jack took a deep breath, his posture relaxing just a fraction. This is your last chance, he said, his voice steady. Leave now, and we won't come after you. The goon looked like he was about to argue, but then he seemed to think better of it. With a quick glance at his downed comrade, he turned and sprinted back toward the two cars, leaving Jack and the Thunderwolves standing in the night. Jack didn't let his guard down until the goon was out of sight, disappearing into the darkness with his partner. Good job, brother, Diesel said, walking up beside Jack. Jack didn't reply right away. His eyes were still on the road, watching the retreating vehicles. He knew this wasn't over, but for now, the girl was safe. He turned to look at her. She was standing there, wide-eyed and trembling, but she was safe. For now. He stepped toward her, his voice softening. You okay, kid? The girl nodded, tears welling up in her eyes as she looked up at Jack. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaking. Jack smiled, pulling her into a protective hug. You don't need to thank me. We keep our promises. He turned to the rest of the Thunderwolves. We move now. No more waiting. The riders mounted their bikes, the engines roaring back to life, but the atmosphere had shifted. The danger had passed, but Jack knew they couldn't afford to get complacent. He motioned for the girl to climb onto his bike. She hesitated for a moment before nodding and following him. Jack helped her onto the seat behind him, making sure she was safe before he started the engine. The Thunderwolves formed up once more, and they rode off into the night, their bikes cutting through the streets like a wall of iron and fire. The girl clung to Jack's back, her arms wrapped around him tightly, but Jack could tell she was still scared. They weren't out of the woods yet. The world wasn't done testing them, and Jack knew that. But for now, the most important thing was that they were together. And together, they would face whatever came next. The riders pushed forward, their engines roaring into the night, as the city skyline disappeared in the distance. Jack's thoughts were on the road ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to the girl. She had been through too much, far too much for someone her age. He wasn't about to let her go through it alone. Not while he had breath in his lungs and a promise to keep. The night air felt thick as Jack led the Thunderwolves down the quiet roads, their bikes roaring like thunder in the distance. The girl was still holding on to him, her small hands clutching his jacket tightly. Jack could feel her trembling, but he didn't mind. She needed the comfort, and right now, she needed to feel safe. His mind raced as he led the pack, trying to keep his focus. They had made it out of the docks, but the real danger had only just begun. The goons they had confronted were just a small part of the bigger problem. Jack had seen the look in their eyes. They weren't done yet, and neither was the girl's stepfather. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket again. He didn't need to look at it to know it was Diesel. We've got eyes on them. Diesel's voice came through the radio. They're still following. Jack's stomach tightened. They had been careful, keeping a low profile as they rode through the city, but it seemed their pursuers weren't far behind. He glanced over his shoulder, seeing the faint glow of headlights in the distance. They were closing in, and the Thunderwolves couldn't afford to let them get any closer. Stay sharp, everyone, Jack said into the radio. We keep moving. No stopping. We're not letting them get a chance to make a move. The engines roared louder as the riders pushed forward, speeding up as the distance between them and the cars began to close. Jack's heart pounded as he focused. On the road ahead, the wind whipped past his face, the city blurring as they rode faster. The girl's grip on his back tightened, and Jack could feel her breath on his neck. He knew she was scared. Hell, he was scared too. But they didn't have time for fear. They had to get to the safe house. They had to get her out of this mess. We need to lose them, Jack muttered to himself. He was running through every move he could make in his mind, calculating every route, every turn. The night was their ally, but they needed to act fast. Jack saw a narrow alley up ahead, barely wide enough for two bikes to pass. It was a risky move, but it was their best shot. "Follow me," Jack shouted to the riders behind him, signaling to take the alley. The Thunder Wolves shifted in unison, following Jack as he swerved into the alley. The narrow space squeezed them in, but Jack knew they had to make it. He pushed his bike harder, hearing the others follow closely behind. The sound of the engines reverberated off the walls of the alley, echoing like a warning. Jack didn't dare look back. He had no idea if the cars would follow, but he couldn't risk slowing down. The alley twisted and turned, opening up into a more open street. Jack glanced over his shoulder for a split second, just long enough to see that the headlights had been left behind. For now, they had lost them. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but the adrenaline began to wear off. He exhaled sharply, letting the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. "All clear," he said into the radio. For now, the riders slowed down, their bikes humming quietly as they followed Jack's lead. They had to keep moving, but at least for a few minutes, they were safe. Jack glanced down at the girl, still clinging to his back. "You doing okay?" he asked, his voice softer now. The girl nodded, but she didn't speak. Jack could feel her hands still trembling, but there was something else in the way she held on to him. Trust. She trusted him to protect her, and that was something Jack couldn't take lightly. He glanced back at the other riders, his eyes meeting Diesel's. "We make a stop at the safe house. We regroup, and we plan our next move." The Thunderwolves nodded, understanding. They had been through worse before. But protecting this girl, making sure she was safe, that was something else entirely. They had promised her father, and they weren't going to break that promise. As they made their way to the safe house, Jack's mind kept racing. The goons they had confronted at the docks, the ones who had tried to take the girl, were still out there. And behind them, Patrick Donovan, the girl's stepfather, was pulling strings, trying to cover his tracks. Jack knew it wasn't over. It would never be over until the girl was truly safe. He would make sure of that. When they arrived at the safe house, Jack pulled into the driveway and turned off his bike. The riders followed suit, parking in a tight formation. Jack helped the girl off his bike, making sure she was steady before walking her to the door. The house was quiet, hidden in a secluded area on the outskirts of town, far from the chaos of the city. It was exactly what they needed. "You're safe here," Jack told the girl, his voice gentle but firm. She looked up at him, her eyes still wide with fear, but there was something different in them now. Hope. Jack gave her a reassuring smile. "We've got you. You're not alone anymore." He turned to the rest of the Thunder Wolves. "Everyone get some rest. Tomorrow, we take the fight to them." As the Thunder Wolves spread out to secure the area, Jack stood by the door, his mind already working on the next move. The night was far from over, but they had won the first battle. Jack knew it was just the beginning. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a faint orange glow over the horizon as Jack stood by the window, watching the world wake up. The night had been long, filled with tension, but the safe house was still quiet. The girl had finally fallen asleep, wrapped in a blanket in the corner of the room. Jack knew this moment of peace was fleeting. The storm was coming, and they couldn't hide forever. He turned to see Diesel walking into the room, his expression serious. "We've got news," Diesel said quietly, his voice low, as if not wanting to wake the others. Jack straightened, his focus immediately shifting. "What's going on?" Diesel pulled out his phone, showing Jack a message. "It's Donovan. He's putting pressure on some of his connections. Word is, he's not going to stop until he gets her back." Jack frowned. "I know he won't stop. That's why we're not backing down." He turned toward the others, who were starting to gather in the small living room. "Everyone's awake, ready to move. It's time to put an end to this." Diesel nodded. "We're with you, boss. But we need a plan. Donovan isn't just some thug. He's a cop, and he's got resources. If we don't make the first move, he will." Jack took a deep breath, glancing at the girl, still curled up on the couch. He couldn't imagine what she had been through, but he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't risk her being caught again. "All right," Jack said, his voice steady. "We move tonight. But first, we take out the people helping him. We start with his contacts. We don't let anyone stand in our way." The riders nodded, their faces grim. They knew what was at stake. The Thunder Wolves had never backed down from a fight, and this wasn't the time to start. Jack turned to Diesel. "Start making calls. We need information on Donovan's connections, who he's using, where they are, everything." Diesel pulled out his phone, already dialing numbers. The riders dispersed, each taking their place in the plan. Jack could feel the weight of the responsibility on his shoulders, but he couldn't let that stop him. He had made a promise to protect this girl, and he wasn't going to let anything break that vow. As Diesel walked off to make his calls, Jack took a moment to gather his thoughts. The quiet of the safe house felt eerie, but he knew it wouldn't last. Donovan was coming, and Jack needed to be ready. The girl stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at Jack, her face filled with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "Are they coming?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack knelt down beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Not for long," he said firmly. "We're going to take care of it. You're safe here, but we need to move soon." The girl nodded, her eyes filling with tears. Jack couldn't help but feel for her. She had been through so much, and yet she still had the strength to hold on. That was something he would never forget. He stood up and turned back to his team. "Let's get ready. We're going to make sure no one ever hurts her again." The Thunderwolves gathered around, each one prepared for the fight ahead. They had fought side by side in countless battles, but this was different. This wasn't just about them. This was about protecting someone who had no one else. Jack knew that every decision they made from here on out would determine whether the girl would ever feel truly safe again. Diesel returned to the group, his face tense. "I've got some info. Donovan's planning to make a move tomorrow night. We've got one shot at this." Jack nodded. "Then we take the shot. We hit him where it hurts." They all knew what that meant. It wasn't just about taking down Donovan's connections. It was about sending a message. No one threatened the Thunderwolves. No one threatened their family. Jack turned to the girl, his face softening for a moment. "You're not alone anymore," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction. "We'll make sure of that." The girl smiled faintly, her eyes still filled with doubt, but Jack could see the flicker of hope in them. It was a small thing, but it was enough. Jack felt the weight of the moment. The plan was set, and the riders were ready. He could feel the adrenaline building inside him, but he knew they had to be smart. The next move had to be calculated. No mistakes. The night stretched ahead, full of uncertainty, but Jack knew one thing. The Thunderwolves would stand strong. They would protect the girl, no matter what it took. And they wouldn't stop until Donovan and his crew were no longer a threat. As the riders made their final preparations, Jack stepped outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. He looked up at the stars, his thoughts with Tyrone. He had promised his friend he would keep his daughter safe. And Jack never broke a promise. The morning was cold, the air thick with anticipation. Jack stood at the front of the safe house, watching as the riders prepared for the day ahead. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, every single one of them ready for the task at hand. The plan was set in motion, and today, they would take the fight to Donovan. The girl was still inside, her presence like a quiet reminder of the promise Jack had made to her father. The weight of that promise pressed heavily on him, but he was ready. He had to be. Diesel approached Jack, a grim look on his face. "The intel is solid. Donovan's people are already in motion. He's trying to get ahead of us," Diesel said, his voice low but urgent. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. "Then we don't wait. We hit him hard and fast." He turned to his crew, his eyes locking with each rider. "No second chances. We finish this today. We protect the girl. We stop Donovan." The riders nodded in unison, their faces hard and determined. Jack could see the resolve in their eyes. They were a team, a family, and they weren't about to back down. The plan was simple. They would divide into teams, hitting Donovan's known locations, cutting off his escape routes, and ensuring the girl remained protected. Jack's role was to be the tip of the spear, leading the charge to the heart of the storm. "We don't just want Donovan. We want everything he's got. His connections. His people. We take it all down," Jack said, his voice filled with cold certainty. Diesel was already on the move, making calls to ensure their routes were clear. Jack stood still for a moment, taking a breath. His mind flashed back to the docks, to the night they had fought to get the girl out. It felt like a lifetime ago. Jack knew it wasn't over. They had made it this far, but Donovan wouldn't give up. Jack wasn't naive. He had seen how far the man would go to protect his reputation. Donovan wasn't just a cop. He was a predator hiding behind a badge. Jack's thoughts were interrupted as the roar of engines filled the air. The Thunderwolves were ready. Jack gave a nod, and the riders mounted their bikes, their engines growling to life in unison. Jack revved his Harley and led the way, the pack falling in behind him. The streets blurred as they sped through the city, the hum of the engines vibrating through Jack's chest. Every turn they made, every intersection they passed, brought them closer to their destination. The safe house was miles behind them now. Ahead, they would face Donovan's people head-on. "Stay close. Stick to the plan," Jack said into his radio. "We move as one unit." The riders responded in kind, their voices calm but determined. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the city. Jack could see the familiar buildings in the distance, but this wasn't the time to get distracted. Donovan's men were already on edge, waiting for the Thunderwolves to make their move. They wouldn't expect the sheer force that was coming their way. Jack signaled to the riders, and they spread out, blocking off all possible exits. They had the city cornered, and there was nowhere for Donovan to run. Jack's heart raced as they reached their first target, a warehouse on the outskirts. The intel said Donovan was using it as a staging ground for his operations. Jack's team moved quickly, dismounting their bikes and taking cover behind nearby crates. The air was thick with tension as they prepared to strike. Jack's eyes scanned the area, his focus sharp. "This is it. On my mark, we move." He could feel his adrenaline building, the anticipation hanging in the air. The riders were ready. The time had come to bring Donovan's world crashing down. Jack's voice cut through the stillness. "Go." The Thunderwolves moved as one, charging toward the warehouse. The doors burst open, and the riders stormed inside. Chaos erupted instantly. Donovan's men were caught off guard, scrambling to react, but it was too late. The Thunderwolves had them surrounded. Jack took the lead, his eyes searching for Donovan. He knew the man wouldn't be far. As Jack moved through the warehouse, his eyes locked onto one of Donovan's men. "Where is he?" Jack demanded, his voice cold and commanding. The man hesitated, fear creeping into his eyes. Jack stepped closer, his presence intimidating. "Tell me where he is. Now." The man finally spoke, pointing toward the back of the warehouse. "He's in there. With the girl." Jack's stomach clenched. He didn't waste another second. He pushed forward, leading the charge toward the back room. He could hear the sound of voices, muffled, but unmistakable. Donovan was close. Jack kicked the door open, and there, standing in the corner, was Donovan. The man's face twisted in shock as he saw Jack and the Thunderwolves enter. "You think you can just walk in here and take her?" Donovan sneered, his hand twitching toward his belt. Jack stepped forward, his face hard. "You're done," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. Donovan's eyes flickered to the girl, still sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes wide with fear. Jack moved toward her, his focus never leaving Donovan. "You've hurt enough people," Jack said. "This ends today." Donovan's expression hardened, and in a flash, he pulled a gun from his waist. But before he could raise it, one of the Thunderwolves tackled him to the ground. The gun clattered to the floor, and the rest of the riders quickly subdued him. Jack knelt beside the girl, his voice soft. "You're safe now," he said, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. She looked up at him, her face filled with a mix of relief and exhaustion. Jack knew the battle wasn't over, but for now, they had won. The girl was free, and Jack had kept his promise. The warehouse was now eerily silent. The only sounds were the heavy breathing of the Thunderwolves as they stood guard over the subdued Donovan. Jack stood over him, his eyes sharp, never leaving the man who had caused so much pain. Donovan, now on the ground, was tied up, struggling but unable to free himself. His defiance was gone, replaced by fear. Jack didn't feel any satisfaction. This wasn't a victory for him. It was a necessary step in keeping his promise. The girl was safe, but that didn't mean the fight was over. As the Thunderwolves secured the area, Jack turned to the girl, still sitting quietly in the corner, her eyes wide with uncertainty. She had witnessed everything, and Jack knew the trauma would take time to heal. But for now, she was free. Jack walked over to her, his voice soft but firm. "You're safe now. We're not going anywhere until this is all over." The girl looked up at him, her expression weary but grateful. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Jack nodded, his gaze softening for a moment. "You don't need to thank me," he said, crouching down to her level. "We protect family." The girl looked at him with tears in her eyes, and Jack could see the weight of the past few days, the fear, the uncertainty, the isolation. She had been through more than any child should have to endure, but she wasn't alone anymore. "We'll take care of everything," Jack added, his voice steady. He stood up and motioned to the rest of the riders. We move now. No one leaves here until Donovan's network is dismantled. We finish what we started. Diesel stepped forward, nodding. We've got eyes on all the key players. We'll hit them fast, one by one. Jack nodded, his eyes cold and calculating. Good. We're not giving him a chance to recover. Not this time. The Thunderwolves moved swiftly, setting up their positions, ready to dismantle Donovan's operation piece by piece. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Donovan's web of connections was vast, and even if they took him down, others would rise in his place. The real battle was just beginning. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He pulled it out, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the name on the screen. It was Diesel. We've got a problem. Diesel's voice came through the speaker, urgency in his tone. What's going on? Jack asked, already on edge. One of Donovan's people is trying to make a run for it. They've got backup moving in from the south side. We can't let them regroup, Diesel said. Jack cursed under his breath. He knew this wouldn't be easy. All right, we hold them off. No one gets away. This ends now. The Thunderwolves regrouped, ready for whatever came next. Jack could hear the distant rumble of approaching vehicles, the sound growing louder by the second. Get in position, he commanded. We hit them fast and hard. No hesitation. The engines of the motorcycles roared to life as the riders readied themselves for the next phase of the operation. Jack kept his focus, knowing that this was the moment where everything could go wrong. The backup Donovan had called in wasn't just muscle. They were trained, dangerous, and willing to do anything to protect their own. But Jack wasn't about to back down. He had promised the girl's father that he would protect her, and he wasn't going to break that promise now. The vehicles pulled into view, headlights cutting through the darkness. Jack signaled for the Thunderwolves to spread out, taking up strategic positions as they prepared to ambush the incoming threat. The first car skidded to a stop, and the riders wasted no time. They surrounded the vehicle in seconds, their bikes cutting off any escape. Jack moved forward, his body tense, ready to strike. As the doors of the car opened, Jack saw two men step out, both armed and looking ready for a fight. They didn't have a chance. The Thunderwolves descended on them like a storm, overpowering them in a matter of seconds. One of the men tried to draw a weapon, but Diesel was faster, knocking it from his hand with a swift move. You're not going anywhere, Diesel growled, pinning the man to the ground. Jack turned to see the second man attempting to flee, but he was quickly surrounded by two other riders, who restrained him without hesitation. Donovan's network is falling apart, Jack said to himself, watching the scene unfold. But something inside him told him it wasn't over yet. As the riders cuffed the two men and prepared to take them to the safe house, Jack's phone buzzed again. It was another message from Diesel. They're calling in reinforcements. We've got to move now, or they'll get away. Jack's heart raced. All right, we're done here. Let's go. The Thunderwolves mounted their bikes, ready to hit the next target. Jack glanced back at the girl, who was standing by the door of the safe house, watching them with wide eyes. She was safe, but Jack knew the road ahead would be long and dangerous. You're not alone anymore, he whispered to himself. They would protect her. They would make sure Donovan's influence was wiped out, no matter what it took. The Thunderwolves rode off into the night, their engines echoing through the streets as they prepared for the next battle. The end was near, but Jack knew this war was far from over. The sun had barely risen when Jack and the Thunderwolves returned to the safe house, the weight of the night still heavy in the air. The girl, sitting on the porch, looked up as Jack approached. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also the relief. She was safe, for now. But Jack knew this peace wouldn't last long. Donovan's men were still out there, and Jack had no illusions about how far they would go to finish what they started. He walked up the stairs to the porch, the weight of the situation pressing on him. The mission was far from over. The Thunderwolves had dealt with a few of Donovan's men, but the real challenge lay ahead. Donovan, despite being caught off guard, was far from finished. He had a network, a dangerous, well-connected network that could strike at any moment. Jack turned to his crew, his voice low but filled with purpose. We've taken down a few pieces of his operation, but the real fight starts now. We hit him where it hurts. His people, his money, everything he's built. We take it all down. Diesel, who had been standing by, nodded. I've got a few more names from our intel. We're close, Jack. We just need to keep pushing. Jack looked over at the girl. She was still young, too young to be caught in the chaos of this world. She had been through so much already, and it was up to Jack and the Thunderwolves to ensure she didn't face any more of it. "You're not going through this alone," Jack said to her, his voice steady. "We'll protect you. We won't stop until this is finished." The girl nodded, though her eyes still held the weight of fear. Jack could see how much this had cost her. It was a burden no one should bear, especially not someone so young. He had promised her father, Tyrone, that he would keep her safe, and Jack wasn't about to break that promise. The rest of the Thunderwolves had gathered around, ready to move. They were a tight-knit crew, and each member knew the stakes. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal. It was about protecting a child, about doing right by the people who counted on them. "Let's get to work," Jack said, his tone hardening as he gave the order. The Thunderwolves mounted their bikes and revved their engines, the sound cutting through the morning stillness. As they rolled out, Jack kept his eyes on the road ahead, focused on the task at hand. They were heading into the heart of the city now, moving quickly through the streets, determined to stay ahead of Donovan's forces. The further they went, the more Jack could feel the tension building. They were closing in on Donovan's main operation, a warehouse on the edge of town where he kept his most valuable assets. Jack knew this would be their toughest mission yet. The warehouse was heavily guarded, and any wrong move could tip Donovan off. But Jack wasn't worried. Not anymore. He had his crew, and together they were unstoppable. As they reached the outskirts of town, Jack could feel the air grow tense. They were getting closer. Diesel's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got eyes on the place. It's a fortress, but we can get in." Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as he glanced at his crew. "We don't just get in," Jack replied, his voice steady and calm. "We take it. We hit them hard and fast. No hesitation. This is it." The Thunderwolves moved into position, surrounding the warehouse in complete silence. Jack led the charge, his bike roaring as they approached the front gate. His eyes never left the entrance as the rest of the riders spread out. It was now or never. Jack reached for the radio, speaking low and controlled. "On my mark, we move in. We stick together. No one gets left behind." He could feel the excitement building in his chest, but he remained focused. The girl's face flashed in his mind. They had to finish this. As Jack gave the signal, the Thunderwolves stormed the warehouse, their bikes revving and echoing in the night air. The sound of engines filled the air as they burst through the gates, catching the guards off guard. Jack led the charge into the heart of the warehouse, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of Donovan. The guards tried to scramble into position, but it was too late. The Thunderwolves had already taken control. The battle was fierce, but quick. The Thunderwolves moved like a well-oiled machine, overwhelming the guards with speed and precision. Jack's mind stayed sharp as he moved through the warehouse, his focus laser-like. He knew they were getting close. And then he saw him, Donovan. The man stood at the back of the warehouse, flanked by two of his men. He looked more composed than Jack had expected, but Jack knew this was the end for him. Donovan didn't flinch as Jack walked toward him, but there was a nervousness in his eyes. "You think you can stop me?" Donovan sneered, pulling a gun from his waist. "This is just the beginning." Jack didn't hesitate. His voice was cold and unyielding. "This ends today." With one swift move, Jack disarmed Donovan, knocking the gun from his hand and sending him sprawling to the ground. "It's over," Jack said, looking down at the defeated man. "You're done." As the rest of the Thunderwolves secured the area, Jack turned back to the girl, who had followed them into the warehouse. She stood by the door, watching the scene unfold. Jack smiled at her, his voice soft. "It's over. You're safe now." The girl nodded, a faint smile breaking through her exhaustion. Jack knew this was the beginning of a new chapter for her. They had taken down Donovan, but they had also taken down his empire, and now, the girl could finally be free. Jack looked around at his crew. They had won, but the road ahead was still long. But for today, they had secured the girl's future. And that was all that mattered. The warehouse was now silent, the storm of violence having passed. Jack stood still for a moment, surveying the scene. Donovan and his men had been taken down, their plans unraveling with each passing minute. But Jack knew better than to celebrate just yet. There were still pieces of the puzzle left to deal with. He turned to the girl, who stood near the door, watching the aftermath with wide eyes. Her expression was a mixture of relief and disbelief, as if she couldn't quite process what had just happened. Jack walked over to her, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. "You're safe now," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. The girl nodded, but Jack could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. The trauma was still there. It wasn't going to disappear overnight, but for now, she was out of harm's way. Jack couldn't help but think of her father, Tyrone. He had promised him that he would protect his daughter, and for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he had fulfilled that promise. But the job wasn't done. The Thunderwolves had made their mark, but they couldn't rest. Donovan's empire might have been taken down, but there were still more enemies lurking in the shadows. Jack turned back to his crew, who had gathered around, making sure the area was secure. Diesel approached him, a grim expression on his face. "We've got a problem," Diesel said quietly. Jack's stomach tightened. "What's going on?" Diesel handed him his phone, showing a series of texts. "Looks like Donovan wasn't working alone. His network goes deeper than we thought." Jack cursed under his breath. "I should have known. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Diesel nodded. "I've got some names. Some of them are high up. We need to move quickly before they disappear." Jack's mind raced as he processed the information. Donovan had been just one part of the puzzle, but now they had a bigger problem on their hands. "We take them all down," Jack said, his voice cold with determination. "We don't let anyone slip through the cracks. We end this once and for all." The Thunderwolves didn't hesitate. They mounted their bikes, ready for the next phase of the operation. Jack could feel the weight of the task ahead, but he wasn't about to back down. They had come this far, and they wouldn't stop until every last piece of Donovan's network was destroyed. As the riders revved their engines, Jack's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, seeing another text from Diesel. "We've got eyes on one of them," Diesel said. "They're moving fast, but we can get to them before they disappear." Jack's jaw tightened. "Let's move. We've got no time to waste." The Thunderwolves sped through the city, their bikes tearing through the streets as they chased down the next target. Jack's thoughts were sharp, focused on the task ahead. They were closing in on Donovan's associates, and this time, Jack wouldn't let them slip away. The city passed by in a blur as they made their way to the target location, a small, unassuming building on the outskirts of town. It looked ordinary, but Jack knew better. This was where the real danger lay. The Thunderwolves pulled up outside the building, their engines dying down as they prepared for the next move. Jack glanced around, taking in the surroundings. The building was quiet, but Jack knew that silence often meant trouble. He turned to his crew, his voice low and commanding. "We go in fast. We hit them hard. No hesitation. We take down everyone inside." Diesel nodded, his eyes sharp. "Understood. We've got your back." Jack motioned for the riders to spread out, their movements swift and coordinated. They had done this before. They knew their roles, and they knew what needed to be done. Jack led the way, his boots heavy as he walked toward the entrance. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with anticipation. This was it, the moment of truth. As Jack reached the door, he signaled for his crew to get into position. He didn't wait for confirmation. With one swift motion, he kicked the door open, his heart pounding as the Thunderwolves stormed inside. The sound of boots hitting the floor echoed in the building as they spread out, taking control of the situation. The men inside were caught off guard, scrambling to react. But it was too late. The Thunderwolves were already in control. Jack's eyes scanned the room, his mind working quickly. He could hear the shouts of confusion from the men inside, but it was clear they were outmatched. Jack moved forward, his eyes locking onto one of the men who was trying to make a run for it. He didn't hesitate. With one swift move, Jack tackled him to the ground, pinning him with ease. "You're not going anywhere," Jack said coldly, his hand gripping the man's arm tightly. The rest of the Thunderwolves quickly moved in, securing the rest of the men inside. Jack stood up, his eyes scanning the room. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he didn't falter. They were so close. The job was almost done. Jack turned to his crew, his voice steady. "Keep them contained. We need to find the leader." Diesel nodded, pulling out his phone. "I've got a lead on him. He's still here." Jack's mind was focused as they continued to search the building. Every room was checked, every corner searched. And then, in the back of the building, they found him. The leader, the man who had been pulling the strings all along. Jack didn't waste a second. He moved toward him, his eyes narrowing. "It's over," Jack said, his voice low and threatening. The man tried to move, but he was quickly overpowered by Jack and his crew. Jack looked at him, cold and unyielding. "You're done." The warehouse was silent now, except for the muffled sound of the men being restrained by the thunder wolves. Jack stood in the center of the room, staring down at the leader, the man who had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes. His face was bruised from the confrontation, but his arrogance had not faded. He sat on the ground, tied up, but his eyes still burned with a hatred that Jack could feel across the room. Jack took a step forward, his boots echoing in the quiet. "It's over," he said calmly. The man smirked, despite his situation. "You think you've won?" he sneered. "This isn't the end. There are always others, always more waiting to take control." Jack crouched down, his voice dropping to a low growl. "Not this time. You're done. Your entire network is finished." The man's smirk faltered for a moment, and Jack knew that the real weight of the situation had started to sink in. He wasn't just dealing with some random thug. This man had been the linchpin for something much bigger, something that could have destroyed so many lives. Jack could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. The girl was safe for now, but the fight was far from over. He had to finish what they started. "We're taking you in," Jack said, "but you won't be able to hurt anyone else. Not anymore." The man laughed bitterly. "You think you've won? Do you think the police will keep you safe? You don't know who you're messing with." Jack stood up and signaled to Diesel, who stepped forward, securing the man even tighter. "We don't need the police to stop you," Diesel said, his voice cold. "We've already done that, and we'll make sure no one else gets hurt because of you." The man was silent now, no longer boasting or threatening. He realized the Thunder Wolves had already won, and there was nothing he could do about it. Jack looked around at his crew, nodding in approval. They had done what they came here to do. Donovan's operation was crumbling piece by piece, and now, this man would face the consequences. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and checked the message. It was from one of his riders. "We've got backup incoming. They're getting closer." Jack's stomach tightened. He knew it wasn't over. Donovan might have been dealt with, but the man's associates were still out there. "All right," Jack said, turning to the crew. "We don't rest. We move out now. Make sure no one else is left standing." The Thunder Wolves quickly moved to secure the area, taking the leader with them as they prepared to leave the warehouse. Jack motioned for the girl, who had been silently watching from the doorway. "You're safe now," Jack said softly, his voice reassuring. She had been through so much already, but Jack could see the faintest glimmer of hope in her eyes. She nodded, her expression still full of uncertainty, but there was a sense of relief, too. "I promised your father I would protect you," Jack continued, "and I'm going to keep that promise. No one will hurt you again." The girl didn't speak, but the way she looked at him told Jack everything. She trusted him, and that trust was something Jack couldn't take lightly. As they all moved out of the warehouse and into the street, Jack looked around at his crew. They had come this far, but there was still so much to be done. Donovan might be gone, but the people who had helped him were still out there, hiding in the shadows. They had to be dealt with. "We finished this today," Jack said, his voice firm and unyielding. "We don't stop until every last one of them is gone." The Thunder Wolves were ready. The roar of their engines filled the air as they sped through the streets, heading toward their next target. Jack's mind raced, thinking about the next move, calculating the best approach. But one thing was clear. They had come too far to fail now. The girl, who had been sitting quietly behind him, finally spoke. "Are they coming after me?" Her voice was small, but there was a fear there that Jack couldn't ignore. He turned to look at her, his expression softening. "No one is coming after you. I promise you that." He could feel the weight of her question. She had lived her life in fear, and Jack knew that it wasn't something that would just disappear overnight. But he was determined to make sure that she would never have to face that fear again. "We're going to make sure you're safe, and no one will hurt you," Jack reassured her. The rest of the crew remained quiet as they moved forward, their expressions focused and determined. They were ready for anything, and Jack could feel the power of their loyalty in the air. Together, they had brought down a dangerous criminal operation, and now they would finish it. Jack's phone buzzed again. Diesel was on the other end. "We've got them in sight," Diesel said. "We'll take them down now." Jack nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Let's finish this." The Thunder Wolves sped through the city, closing in on their target. Jack knew they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. They were almost there, and when they reached their destination, It would be the final blow. They would end this once and for all. The girl's safety depended on it. The Thunderwolves' bikes tore through the streets with a deafening roar, the rumble of the engines breaking the eerie quiet of the early morning. Jack led the pack, his mind focused, calculating the next move. The city passed by in a blur, but his thoughts never wavered from the task at hand. The girl, still clinging to him, sat behind him on his bike, her body pressed against his back. Jack could feel the weight of her trust, and it drove him forward. They had come too far to stop now. The final phase of their mission was upon them, and they couldn't afford to fail. The rest of the Thunderwolves were with him, their engines roaring in perfect harmony as they followed Jack's lead. They were a well-oiled machine, each rider knowing their role, their focus unwavering. They had fought hard to get here, and Jack knew they were ready for whatever came next. Diesel's voice crackled over the radio. "We've got eyes on the target. They're making their move." Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars. "What's the situation?" Diesel responded, his tone sharp and urgent. "They're trying to escape. We've got one shot to stop them." Jack's mind raced. He could feel the pressure mounting, but there was no turning back now. "We hit them hard." "No hesitation," Jack ordered. "Make sure no one gets away." The Thunderwolves accelerated, the streets blurring as they pushed forward. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve was unshakable. He had made a promise to protect the girl, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in their way. As they neared the target location, Jack's eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. The building was quiet, almost too quiet. The hair on the back of his neck stood up. Something felt off. "We're in position." Diesel's voice came through the radio, calm but alert. "Everyone ready?" Jack's response was immediate. "Let's finish this." They pulled up to the building, their bikes screeching to a halt as the Thunderwolves surrounded it. Jack signaled for the riders to dismount, his hand on the grip of his weapon as he moved toward the entrance. The tension in the air was palpable, but Jack didn't flinch. He had been in far worse situations, but this one was different. This was personal. They had already taken down Donovan, but there were still others, people who had been working with him, pulling the strings. Jack wasn't about to leave any of them standing. "We go in fast. We don't let anyone escape," Jack ordered. The Thunderwolves nodded in unison, their faces set with determination. They knew the stakes. They knew what was at risk. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for the girl, for her future. Jack led the charge, his heart pounding in his chest as they approached the building. The doors were locked, but that wasn't a problem. Jack kicked the door open with a powerful blow, the wood splintering as the Thunderwolves surged into the building. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and fear. The men inside scrambled, but it was too late. The Thunderwolves were already in control. Jack moved quickly, his eyes scanning every corner of the building as the riders cleared the rooms one by one. His mind was focused, calculating the next move. He couldn't afford to miss a single detail. They couldn't let anyone get away. "Check the back," Jack shouted to Diesel, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Diesel nodded, signaling to the rest of the crew as he moved toward the rear of the building. Jack moved forward, his eyes narrowing as he searched for the leader, the final piece of the puzzle. The men inside were terrified, scrambling to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Jack had already seen to that. He knew the leader would be hiding somewhere, and he wasn't going to let him slip away. As Jack entered the last room, he found him. The man stood by a desk, his hands raised in surrender. "You think you've won?" the man sneered. "You're nothing. You can't stop us." Jack's eyes locked onto him, the fury in his gaze unmistakable. "You're finished," Jack said, his voice cold as ice. The man tried to move, but before he could take another step, Jack was on him. One swift motion, and the man was on the ground, pinned under Jack's weight. "You're done," Jack repeated, his voice low and final. The Thunderwolves secured the rest of the building, rounding up the remaining men. It was over. Jack stood over the man, his hand gripping the collar of his shirt as he pulled him to his feet. "You're going to pay for everything you've done," Jack said. The man didn't say anything, his face a mask of anger and fear. Jack turned to the rest of the Thunderwolves. "Take him out of here. Make sure he doesn't cause any more trouble." As they moved the man out of the room, Jack turned back to the girl, who had been standing silently by the door, watching the entire scene unfold. She was safe now, but Jack knew it would take time for her to heal. He walked over to her, his voice soft. "It's over," he said. "You're safe now." She nodded, her eyes still wide with a mixture of disbelief and relief. Jack smiled at her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "We've got you. No one will hurt you again." The girl finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Jack nodded, his face serious. "You don't have to thank me. We made a promise, and we keep our promises." The Thunderwolves gathered around, the mission complete. Jack stood tall, his mind still racing. The job wasn't finished, but they had taken down the last of Donovan's network. And with that, the girl could finally be free. Jack looked at her one last time. "You're not alone anymore." The Thunderwolves headed out, the sound of their engines roaring into the distance as they left the building behind. Jack's heart was still heavy with everything that had happened, but as they rode off into the night, he knew they had done the right thing. The girl was safe, and that was all that mattered. The Thunderwolves rode down the empty streets, the morning sun rising slowly in the distance. Jack was at the front, his eyes fixed ahead, but his mind was elsewhere. They had completed their mission, and Donovan's operation was finished. The girl, once again safe, sat behind him, still holding on to him with a silent but firm trust. Jack could feel the weight of her small hands on his back, a reminder of the promise he had made. But as the city stretched out before them, Jack knew that this wasn't just a victory. It was the beginning of a long road to healing, not just for the girl, but for everyone involved. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of action, danger, and uncertainty, and Jack wasn't naive enough to think it was all behind them. He had seen enough to know that peace in their world was often fleeting. The girl was quiet, her face pressed against his back, her grip loosening slightly as they rode. Jack glanced behind him to check on her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes. She had seen too much for someone her age, but Jack had no doubt that with time, she would heal. The world they had just escaped was harsh, unforgiving, but she was out of it now. That was what mattered most. Diesel's voice crackled over the radio, snapping Jack back to the present. "We're clear. No sign of anyone tailing us." Jack's grip on the handlebars tightened as he nodded. "Good. Let's head back to the safe house and regroup. We'll need to figure out the next steps." Diesel responded with a quick, "Copy that," and the Thunderwolves picked up the pace, their bikes roaring through the streets. Jack's mind, however, was on the girl. He had promised her father, Tyrone, that he would protect her, and he had kept that promise. For now, she was safe, but Jack knew the psychological scars would take time to heal. He had seen it before, children caught in the chaos of a world they never asked for. They didn't choose this life. They didn't choose to be in danger, but they had no choice but to endure. As they neared the safe house, Jack felt a sense of relief. This place, though temporary, had served its purpose. It had kept them safe. They pulled into the driveway, the sound of their bikes fading as they stopped. Jack dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a firm thud. The girl slowly climbed off the bike, still looking around cautiously, though she knew by now that they were safe. She glanced at Jack, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack smiled and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. We made a promise, and we keep our promises." She looked up at him, her expression softening. She hadn't had many people she could rely on, and Jack knew that trust wasn't something easily earned, especially not after everything she had been through. "Are you okay?" Jack asked, his voice gentle but firm. She nodded slowly, though Jack could still see the lingering uncertainty in her eyes. "I will be," she whispered. Jack nodded, understanding. He wasn't going to rush her. Healing took time. He turned to the rest of the Thunderwolves, signaling for them to head inside. They had done their part, but the aftermath was still there. The weight of the past few weeks wasn't something that could just be shaken off. Diesel, always the pragmatic one, followed Jack. "You did good, Jack," Diesel said as they walked toward the door. Jack nodded. "We all did. But it's not over. We still need to make sure everything is locked down. This wasn't just about taking down Donovan. It's about making sure his network doesn't rebuild." Diesel's expression darkened. "I know. We've got to make sure the others don't get away." Jack turned to face him, his expression steely. "Exactly. This is just the beginning. We don't stop until everything is wiped out. No one left to rebuild what we've taken down." Diesel nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. As the rest of the crew filed into the house, Jack paused for a moment, glancing back at the girl. She had found a seat by the window, watching the world outside. She wasn't completely safe yet. The world wasn't done with her. Jack knew that. The shadows of Donovan's associates still loomed large, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But Jack wasn't going to let that happen. Not while he was still breathing. He walked over to her, crouching down so they were eye to eye. You're safe now. You don't have to worry about them anymore. We'll make sure they can't hurt anyone again. She looked up at him, a small, uncertain smile appearing on her face. It wasn't much, but it was something. Thank you, she said again, her voice steady. Jack stood, giving her a reassuring nod. We made a promise. As Jack stood in the doorway, looking out over the horizon, he knew this wasn't just about protecting the girl anymore. It was about making sure the world she was entering was a safer place. There would always be another fight, another challenge, but Jack knew he and his crew would face it head-on. They had come this far. They wouldn't stop now. Not until the job was done. And when it was done, when the girl could finally live without fear, Jack would know they had won. For now, they had finished the fight. But the battle for peace, for safety, was never truly over.